Working in oncology, you have to, basically everyone's immunosuppressed, right? So like they get the weird bugs and infections that you and I wouldn't get. So I kind of describe the job as like inpatient medicine, like what I do at South Shore, but on steroids. Like it's very complicated and different, and you don't see like it's not like the common pneumonia. It's like people getting the weird bugs. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and so, I don't say this lightly at all. Like obviously in your position, you're always doing everything that you can to make sure that there's like no mistakes and your patients are cared for perfectly. But like there almost has to be this even extra added layer of attention to these oncology patients, because something that like, you know, if there was a little mix up, like say, I don't know if this would even affect anybody, but like if my med was like off for a half hour, probably not going to do a big like damage to me, but like them, you just want to make sure they're treated like extra delicately in a way. Yeah, totally.
A lot of different layer of like emotion goes into that, like caring for the patients and their families. They're obviously like sick, not feeling well, worried, concerned, like what does the future hold? So there is a lot of like the palliative care stuff that we do with oncology that we don't do with other patient populations.
For you as a caregiver, there must be an enormous emotional toll that's taken on you. And I know that because I'm your friend as well.
Yeah.
But, you know, at least with the general medicine, most of the time, those people are going to get healthy and get out of there and, you know, be well on their way. Whereas your cancer patients, they might be comfort measures. They might be with something that doesn't have a cure, that isn't as simple as let's just get you healthy and get you out of here. How do you have to sort of change anything in your caregiving when not just being the extra cautious, obviously like we were just talking about, but just like communication or certain things you have to do differently, and how does that affect you personally when you have to go home?
Yeah. So I think definitely I feel like I carry myself very differently. Like at the two different jobs, I have learned that just like a simple touch or like taking the time to explain things a little bit more can really go a long way. And especially with cancer patients. And so, yeah, so it definitely, my interactions I feel like are very different. Like at South Shore, I have like a Walkie Talkie person our age with just like a cellulitis, and they're like, just get me out of here, dude. Like put me on the oral antibiotics and get me home. Whereas like, you know, it's very different in town. So that's definitely something I've learned from the get-go, and that has like stuck with me, is just like trying to like envision myself on the other side of it and how I would want to be cared for and talked to. And like, these aren't like our Joe Schmo Walkie Talkie young folks. These people don't feel well and like unfortunately come right back to the hospital a lot of the times, like after discharge, because they are prone to getting sick. And so, yeah, I think to go back to your initial question, I think that I didn't even answer, like one of the hardest parts is like we kind of build a rapport with our patients in Boston. Like, yes, we make them feel better and send them home, but they do often come back. And so it's like, oh, so-and-so's back again. Like her daughter got married, like, and like she, you know, so-and-so moved and like bought a house on the Cape and like just got to spend some time there. And like, you know, you just get to know your patients and their families more. And so it's really tough, like seeing them come back and getting, with time, possibly sicker and sicker. And unfortunately, recently I feel like we've been seeing a lot of younger patients too, which is really tough. Yeah, like I feel like, I don't know if COVID had anything to do with it, like people ignoring their symptoms for so long. But we do have like often like young women in their 30s with like metastatic breast cancer, or there's been a lot of like colon cancer in young guys lately.
Yeah, I feel like that is a common pattern that we're seeing, or that I've like read about, I've heard about, I've seen on TV. Like a lot of people sort of put their health concerns to the side during COVID because they were just nervous, or maybe they just like didn't want to be in the hospital, so they were thinking about like, oh, I don't want to get COVID, and then they ignored that one thing that they had going on. So a lot of things that, and this isn't for like every single person, every single case, but there are like some cases where if you had listened to your gut and like gone in sooner, maybe it wouldn't have gotten to this stage or gotten to this severity.
Yeah.
But people just held off because they were kind of freaked out by hospitals and that whole
Totally.
scenario.
And I don't blame them. It was
Totally.
like, you know, a weird, scary time. But yeah, that definitely happened a lot where like people would have like back pain. They're like, I'm not going to the hospital. Like, you know, it's just back pain or like, you know, like, I don't know.
But it could have been like a tumor on their spine,
Totally.
you know, like
it's scary.
you think, and especially I think older generations too. Like I know you're saying there's a lot of younger people coming in, but especially like I know my dad getting him into the hospital or like the doctor's office is like pulling teeth. I just feel like they have this like,
so stubborn.
We're gonna keep like pushing. I'm fine. Everything's fine. So it almost like they got to finally lean into that, like because there was not much I could do, right, or like someone could do in those situations. It's like, oh yeah, you're right. The hospital is kind of a scary place right now. And so they were like, yeah, I told you I'm fine. I don't need to go in. But a couple things on what you just said. Number one, when you mentioned walkie talkie, I don't want people at home to think that you're actually talking about a walkie talkie. It's like a medical. Sorry. I know what you mean by it, but I just want them to understand you're not talking about literally being on like a little remote control. When you say walkie talkie, it's patients who can walk and talk independently.
Yes, totally.
They're communicative. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Sorry about that. I should have clarified. Yeah.
No, that's totally fine. I knew what you meant. I just wanted them to know because they're like, wait, what's a walkie talkie? And secondly, I think that I can relate to what you're talking about is almost like there's pros and cons to both, because I imagine that as much as great as it is and rewarding to know that in general medicine, you know, you have somebody who's sick, they get better, they go home, and then they don't have to come back. Like, that's nice, but you do make connections with your patients, so it is kind of sad. Like, you'll never see them again. Like, you don't know how that turned out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of hard. But then at the same time, with these oncology patients who you're getting to know every aspect of your life, of their lives, that's also difficult.
Totally.
Because ultimately, if God forbid, like it, you know, it doesn't turn out well for them, then you were so invested in them that it makes it difficult. I remember when I was in my, I feel like I've told you this story before, but I remember being in when I was in nursing school, I was in my pediatric rotation, and the year was split up. The first year we did peds, and the second half we did maternity, and then the classes swapped. So the first half I did pediatrics, and I was on a unit where this little girl who was like 6 years old and just born with cancer and just had all these comorbidities with it, like a heart defect and all these different things. And I just got to know her mom. They were in there for like months at a time, and like I got to know her whole family, and she was just so sweet and so full of life. And then the second half of the year, when I was on my maternity unit, my maternity rotation, like my friends were on peds, they told me that she had passed. Ugh. And it just like broke my heart because I was so invested. I would see her every single week, and I would talk to her every single week, and like she was just the sweetest thing. And it's just especially so sad when it's children. And then I remember months later, I went to school in Portland, so there's only one mall, and I was like at the mall. I mean, this was like almost towards the end of the school year. I hadn't been in there for so long. I obviously hadn't seen her mother, but I was at one of the stores in the mall, and I saw her mother and her brother.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember being like, I want to go up and just say I'm so sorry and that I'm thinking of you, but then I'm like, will she remember me? Also, is that appropriate? Are you allowed to approach a patient like in this type of setting? I don't know. And I think about that all the time of like, I wish I just said like, you know, I like wanted to give her a hug, or like, I'm sorry, or I'm thinking of her. And I think about it quite often. And I imagine you have many moments like that. I don't think you run into every single, you know, family or patient in the wild in real life. But like those like, oh, like coulda, shoulda, or like, I'm still thinking of them. I wish I knew, or, you know, like I wish I stayed in touch. Or can you go to like a service, a funeral service if somebody passes, or is that inappropriate?
Yeah. Definitely you can, because it's been done. You can. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, I always have that. I have that similar feelings where I'm like, oh, I haven't seen so-and-so in a while. I wonder like if they're okay. Like, if, you know, but yeah, because like I said, like they unfortunately come in a lot with time as the cancer progresses. So yeah, that does happen a lot.
The other thing that I want to ask you about too is, I mean, we all know this, in your profession, the shifts are long. You're usually doing 12-hour shifts. That's pretty standard or typical. And I'm curious what you may have had to change personally, like either habits or patterns or just things like maybe mindset, because to stay sharp for 12 hours long. And especially if you're doing it multiple days in a row, which I know that you do, that's really, really challenging. So not only is it like just I need to stay awake and alert and do good at my job, I mean, your job is very much so like it requires your undivided attention and accuracy. So for you, how have you adjusted to that as either like a person or just like kind of putting that hat on? And what's that been like for you to get into a good rhythm there?
It took a while, honestly, because so I've never had a job that like was like 12 hours long. We do 7 to 7. Thankfully, we don't have to do overnight, so it's just during the day. Because people in the emergency room, I don't know how they do that, like rotating schedules. I could never. But yeah, like you said, we do like 3 to 4 days in a row, and then you get like 4 days off or whatever. And it takes a lot of time to realize like you got to get to bed at a like decent time, because you're not going to function. Like maybe you will the next day, but like by day 2 or 3, like it gets rough, straggly. So I think like just getting in the rhythm of like getting enough sleep, like meal prepping, which can be easier said than done. Yeah. So you don't have to like worry about like then coming home at night after you sit an hour of traffic, like making lunch for the next day. You know what I mean? And staying up for that. So I think just learning to be be regimented in like sleep and like being productive while you can, like for the short amount of time that you are home to get ready for the next day, or on your days off too, like making sure that you do all the laundry and like all the stuff on those days, so you're not like coming home and doing that. But easier said than done, like I said. So it's just like finding a rhythm for sure.
Yeah, and definitely trying to keep to a schedule as best as you can.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we have a group text and I like don't speak for those 3 days that I'm on because I'm just like, go.
Helen comes like on Wednesdays and she's just like 17 text messages because she's finally come out of the cave. That is the hospital.
Yes.
No, that's so good fun. You do that. Same but different. Yeah. As a mom of 3, what have been some of the challenges with your schedule and being a mom? Like, I don't mean to tug on the heartstrings, but like that's missing dinner times and bath times and putting the kids to bed. And so what's that been like for you?
Mm-hmm. So I think, as depending on what field you're in, like if you do primary care, you're like home, I should say usually home for dinner, right? Like you work like the 8 to 5 or whatever, you can be home for bedtime and dinner, reading the kids a book and, all those things. But there's pros and cons to that because like I get to work 2-3 days and then I get to be with my kids for 4 days. Right. So you kind of have to like pick your poison. But it is tough. I mean, I like for this past, for Savannah, I was on leave for 5 months. So we did obviously like some sleep training, but not really. But then you're like back to work and you're like having to sleep train and like Maya, who's now like getting old, like doesn't want to go to bed at 8 o'clock. So she's up when I'm home and then like bedtime gets dragged out a little bit. But I don't know. I guess there's not really like a good answer, but it's tough. Like being a mom to like young kids and also having a full-time job is tough, especially with long hours, for sure. But,
yeah, but that makes sense to me. It's one of those things, it is what it is, right? Yeah. I hate to be like blunt about it, but it's like your hours are your hours. Your schedule is your schedule. So there's not much you can change about it. Obviously, is it a little bit sad or difficult to miss some of those moments for sure? But the flip side is you have all of those days off to then make the most of. 100%, so like even, this weekend you were off and Maya's birthday was yesterday, right? No, today's Wednesday. It was Monday. So I'm like, what day is it? But like you visited her at school and when she went on Monday, and then on the weekend you like had a day where she got to pick whatever she wanted to do and like went to the movies and stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's making the most of the time that you do have and taking advantage of those days off, where it's like, not that it's ever going to be okay to miss a bedtime, but it just like makes it sting a little bit less. Yeah, exactly. Like I couldn't agree more. Like I think, I just think there's no, like I said, like there's no like perfect world where you're going to be like home for it all. So you just have to kind of just make the most of the time that you are with them. well, we're not going for perfect here, so that's fine.
And thankfully, they won't like remember a lot of this time when they're older, so they're not going to like remember that like I wasn't home every single night. For
honestly, that's actually comforting.
Yeah.
Like, and I feel like that is such the epitome of being a parent because you're like, it kills me more than it kills them. They're not going to notice, but it's like that's a sacrifice you'll make.
It also kills James because he's the one home dealing with it all on those days.
He literally was put on this planet to be a parent. He's super dad. He loves it. He loves it. Also, you're definitely like, not that there's a bad cop, good cop, but like you're way more like strict, and James is such a freaking
so lenient, like gives Maya whatever she has him wrapped around her finger. And it's so funny because before we had kids, like we always talked about like who's gonna be strict and who's gonna be like more fun.
Totally would have thought
it was the opposite. Yeah, James was like, I'm gonna like set the ground rules and like she can't date or like look at a boy till she's like 37 and I was like, yeah, okay. Then the kids came and he was way more loosey-goosey, and I found that I had to be stern, like because we couldn't have two fun, wild parents that were like, you don't want to go to bed? Like, okay, like you want to have some ice cream before bed? Like we can't have both of us can't be doing that. One person has to set the ground rules. So
but that's actually a good point. Maybe it will change. Like, you know, I feel like you're setting structure in their lives like as children to kind of like help, you know, build like their personalities and their like who they're gonna be. And then once you realize like, okay, my kid's like does good in school, like they're good, my kid's fine, you'll probably ease off a little bit, and then they'll get into dating, and James is gonna start being the hard parent again.
Yeah, we'll see.
Maybe we'll see that.